Thank you for joining us again this week at Bible Truth and Prophecy. Many of you who follow the program might know who I am. I'm Mark Lindsted, and if you know that I'm usually on the other side of the camera with Dr. Lindsted up here speaking. There's a subject that I've covered a few times over the years that Dr. Lindsted wanted me to cover with our audience here on Bible Truth and Prophecy. And it's a subject that's very near and dear to my heart as we look at things in the Christmas spirit, or things in the light of Christmas through the optics of the Bible rather than the optics of the world. Have you ever been to Israel? I ask that because there are many things you'll see in Israel that will change the way you view certain things that you've read through the Bible your whole life. And I know that Dr. Lindsted has done his fair share to try and change your view of these things and have you understand what the Bible has to say, what the real account of the story is. But if you've been there, you've more than likely seen the Dome of the Rock, or the Shepherd's Field, or the Kidron Valley, or the Hinnom Valley, and many of these places. In fact, when you're there, you're probably greeted the first thing with traffic. You know, you fly into the Tel Aviv airport, and the first thing you're greeted with is traffic as you get moving along. But once you get through that, you may take a short walk. And this short walk from the hotel we choose to stay at while we're there is to the Damascus gate of the old city of Jerusalem. What a wonderful thing you'll see there. In fact, there's Dr. Lindsted right there speaking to this group of children that are on our senior trip for the school. And he's pointing out some interesting things about the Damascus gate. You'll more than likely see the Dome of the Rock. That's one of the first things people see as they come into Jerusalem. Everyone likes to have their bus go take a view of that before they go to their hotel. You'll see this area here is in the Kidron Valley, kind of in front of the Dome of the Rock. You'll see people moving along there. This is from the overlook near the house of Caiaphas. And you see we're having a discussion there, a historic discussion there. And in fact, this was the time of COVID, because you see we're wearing masks. We were one of the first groups back in after COVID. You'll see the beauty of the land of Israel. There are so many beautiful plants, beautiful buildings, countrysides in this area that you just can't help but stop and take a few pictures of them. And from that, you start to see the classroom, as it were, that Christ was teaching from. You'll see this picture off in the distance. This is called the Herodian. And those of you who know this story know that Herod had a mountain moved on top of another mountain to build a palace. He said, people can build palaces, but I can move mountains. Well, this is a really interesting picture. You'll see there's something blurry in front of it here. And if you change the optics on your camera, you'll see that right in front of that is a mustard tree. And this is the classroom that we're talking about that Jesus spoke from. He says, if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you can say to that mountain, move. What an interesting classroom that he taught from. You'll see things like this. I can tell you right now, if you look through many of the documentaries and whatnot that you see of Jerusalem, you're going to see what I call one of the most famous men in Jerusalem. This man has been selling these head scarves for I don't know how long, and I had to take a selfie with him and just snap him there in the background. I'm telling you, if you've seen any documentaries about Jerusalem, I guarantee he's there. You'll see the Mount of Olives from the Mount of Olives, and you'll see it from the other side. There's so many interesting things about the city of Jerusalem and about the state of Israel that help us to understand the stories of the Bible. You'll see places like this. This is my sister, my brother-in-law, and my niece, and one of our people at our school, Jack and his wife. They're standing on some of the original steps coming up out of the Kidron Valley to the house of Caiaphas. Interesting place to think about. When they took Jesus from the Garden of Gethsemane and led him to the house of Caiaphas, he may well have used these stairs. Who knows? You'll get to take your family. You'll get to see certain things. This is my youngest son, Casey, and myself. We're at the top of the Temple Mount here. This first picture, we're seeing this little small cupola here, the Well of Souls, I believe they call it, we think that might be closer to the Holy of Holies than the Dome of the Rock. In fact, remember, Dr. Lindsted says, measure off from this profane place. And then there we are in front of the empty tomb, which is a beautiful place to think about, a beautiful place to visit, and to realize that Jesus is the only prophet or savior in any religion who's not in his tomb. What a wonderful thing. You'll see places like this. This is on the southern steps, one of my favorite areas, because we know that those are still the southern steps and the southern entrance. And your dad might take a horrible picture of you as you're walking, and you're not paying attention. But as we look at all these things, this pizza shop that's been around since I don't know how long, we've eaten there over and over again. But as we look at these things, we start to see our idea of biblical accounts take a little shape. The southern teaching steps, the high place on the Temple Mount, one of my favorite places, the stone that fell from the high place, and there the Hebrew inscription says the place of trumpeting. So remember, when Christ was tempted, he was taken to the high place and tempted. That could very well have been the stone he was standing at when he was tempted by Satan. You'll see olive trees that are 2,600 years old. These trees were probably around when Christ was walking through the Garden of Gethsemane. This is in the Gethsemane area. You'll see Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls and artifacts have been found. You'll see Masada, where the Jewish people held off the Roman army for so long. You'll see the sheer faces of these cliffs, and maybe even have a chance to walk up the side of Masada to see how it was. You'll get to see the Dead Sea, and you can see as I'm floating along there, having a good time, and push that mud all over your body and get its benefits, they say. You'll see one of the most beautiful sunrises I think I've ever seen, and I do like to travel quite a bit, so I've seen several. But you'll see the sunrise over the Sea of Galilee, and it's different every single day. Every single day this is a different view, and it's a beautiful thing to witness. You may be on the top of Megiddo, where overlooking the Valley of Armageddon, where the final battle will wage in the Bible, in the book of Revelation. And you'll have an opportunity to take a picture. This is my oldest son, Mark Jr., in this chariot. A picture that my whole family has had the pleasure of doing. This is my youngest son, Casey, doing the same thing. Here's my brother-in-law doing the same picture. We've done this for many, many years, and it just builds great memories. But these places cement what's happening in the Bible in our minds. This is a dungeon where they may have kept Christ in the house of Caiaphas. This is a cardo, Roman cardo, as you see in the old city of Jerusalem. He'll take some silly pictures there. This is my niece. You'll get a chance maybe to have an authentic Bedouin dinner with Abraham himself greeting you and bringing you into his home and feeding you his date honey chicken. But you'll definitely make some memories with your family if you travel there. One of the things I think that'll happen more than anything, other than the memories, this is one of the boats they found from the time of Christ in the Sea of Galilee. This is a senior picture from one of our trips. Every year the seniors have this picture taken in the Bet Shan area, the public restroom. But one of the things I think that you'll do is you'll cement these stories and what happened in the Bible into your memory. And you'll forever look at them differently than you did before. This is the pool of Herod at Caesarea by the sea. And this is my uncle and one of our guides who is no longer guiding. He's retired, Paul, with the Pilate stone. But as you look at these, and as you see this sunset over the Mediterranean, as you look at these images here, things from your Bible knowledge will change. Things from the stories that you've been told your whole life about how things occurred might change. And I hope they do, because it's very important that they do. This is the church there at the Shepherd's Fields in Bethlehem. And I know that you've been listening to Dr. Lindsted talk more recently about the nativity and how maybe it was more like a cave. This is one of the cave chapels there on site. And I know for a fact that when you go to Israel, your guide, whether it's myself or Dr. Lindsted or whoever, will always end up taking you to the Church of the Nativity. The Church of the Nativity, been around since somewhere in the 300s AD. I believe it was first had something erected on the site. And you'll go in there and they'll tell you, this is the birthplace of Christ. And I know, like, if you've been watching this program for a while, Dr. Lindsted may have changed your idea what that might look like. But when you go into the Church of the Nativity, you're going to see a line like this. You're going to see this huge line, and it's 3 or 4 hours long. And you say, wow, what are they in there looking for? What are they waiting so long to see? Well, according to tradition, they're waiting to see the actual spot on this earth where Jesus was born. The actual spot. I don't think I believe that so much. And if you've been listening to Dr. Lindsted recently, you won't either. But they go down these steps into this little cave area that's, I'm telling you, very hot, very sweaty, muggy. And you're going to see this silver star on the floor. In fact, you're probably going to see people kiss it. You're probably going to see people revere this spot on the floor more than they revere things like their own Bibles. And they're going to tell you this is the spot where Christ was born. Well, like I've been saying, if you've been watching Dr. Lindsted's videos here recently, your mind has probably been changed on that. You're going to think of these scenes, and I heard most recently that Martin Luther might be responsible for the way we look at the Nativity nowadays in Germany. Most of you may think the Nativity looks something like this. A little barn, a little wooden manger there, some hay, some sheep, star above, or maybe you think it might have been a shanty lean-to or something of that nature. But Dr. Lindsted's going to do his best, if he's your guide, and so will I, to shatter this vision for you of the Nativity. You see, in Israel, wood is too precious to use for animals. When you build in Israel, you quarry stone to build stone buildings. And what's left over is a cave. And like I said, if you've been listening to the show recently, you'll know that Dr. Lindsted and I both believe that Jesus was probably born in a cave. And it would look something a little more like this, because while we're in the Church of the Nativity, and that whole line is going through its spot, we're going to go around the other side. And we're going to go down the stairs into a little place like this, and you can see that it's carved out. It's a cave under the Church of the Nativity. Do I think this is exactly where Jesus was born? No. In fact, this is called St. Jerome's Cave. But it's more like what it would have been for Christ. This is more likely what it would have looked like for him to be born in, was a cave. In fact, it may have been more of a picture like this. This is where you might have seen Christ if you came the night of his birth. This is where you would have met the child as he was laid in a stone manger in a cave made for animals. Well, just as Dr. Lindsted worked very hard to change this image in your mind, I hope that I can change the image in your mind of something else. In fact, these are the nativities now that we see that show the cave depiction rather than the manger, and you can get them at our Etsy store. But I hope to come to you today and talk about the Wiseman. In fact, I'd really like to change your view of what the Wisemen really looked like and what they did and who they were and why they were important to the story. As we look at Matthew chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, In the day of Herod the king, behold, there came wisemen from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him. And that word wisemen, that's an interesting thing to think of. As we look here at this verse and we think about it, the word wiseman stands out to me. And in that word, we see a different meaning than most of us understand. But the word wiseman really is Strong's G 3097, meaning magos or magi. In fact, some translations use the word magi. The word magos is translated as wise man and sorcerer many times. There is no literal translation of this word because it's a name of a group of people rather than it is a direct translation. This is the root word we have for magician. So you can see there's a little bit of difference here, but I want to talk about that. I want you to see what I'm discussing today. The magos or magi were really a member of an Eastern priestly group. This priestly group was something similar to the Levitical priests or the Levitical priests of the Jewish people. They would have been considered the clerics or the predictors or the wise council. They've been around since the time of Babylon and Ur, through the Medo-Persian Empire and the Greek Empire as Alexander the Great conquered the world. They were around during the Roman Empire, so during the time of Christ they were around. They studied things like astronomy and astrology, mathematics, and other items that they would use to decipher the times of the seasons and the sunsets and the sunrises. They would use all these things at their fingertips to understand and best predict things for kings and give them wise counsel. And all the way back in the days of Ur, they were very prominent in the East and the Orient both. During all of the empires of the world, they were very prominent. A fun fact, though, the wise men, no matter what all of your nativity scenes have, did not ride camels. I'm sorry, I don't mean to burst your bubble there, but they don't ride camels. In fact, wisemen ride Arabian stallions, the fastest, most beautiful Arabian stallions you've ever seen. They rode on these Persian steeds, and they came as a battalion, just so you know. They weren't in there as just a few old men. The Magi and their religion. This is an interesting one. Fire was their principal element. Maybe thought of as an incarnation of a deity or whatnot. They are monotheistic. They are they have a constant perpetual burning altar as a flame. They have a blood sacrifice altar. And in fact, that sacrifice, after it was made, they would actually consume it. The victim that was sacrificed on that altar was burned and eaten by worshipers and magician priests, or magi priests. They were a counterfeit religion. Really, they were a counterfeit religion. Even then, Satan was working hard to have what Christ had, just to have his own version of it. There's a true religion and a false religion, a true Christian and a false Christian. They would even carry around divining rods with them to understand what the will of their God was for them as they picked things for kings and for rulers to better rule their land or decide when to go to war. It's interesting. It's so similar to the Jewish faith. It's monotheistic. Fire is a principal element. Remember, in the tabernacle, God dwelt as a pillar of fire. Think about that. There's a blood sacrifice where the worshipers would consume the sacrifice. Now, I know as we take the bread and the wine in our current meetings and our current remembrances, we know that those are only symbols. But they says, take of this, it's my flesh. Take of this, it's my blood, to show your association with me. They have the Urim and the Thummim, the Urim and the Thummim. As the Jewish priests have those, they had dividing rods. So you can see it's almost this direct counterfeit Levitical priesthood. They believed in the distinction of unclean animals, and certain insects and reptiles were unclean, and they were very ritualistic about touching dead bodies. We could see that in the Jewish people now. They were heavily influenced by the Jewish people. Why was that? Why were they heavily influenced by the Jewish people? Well, it began back in Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 39, beginning in verse 1, says, "In the 9th year of Zedekiah, king of Judah, in the 10th month came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and all his army against Jerusalem. And they besieged it. And in the 11th year of Zedekiah, in the 4th month, in the 9th day of the month, the city was broken up. And all the princes of the king of Babylon came in and sat in the middle gate, even Nergal-Shazar, Shamgarbrano, Shar-Shechem, Rabasarius, Nergal-Shazar, Rambag, with all the residue of the princes of the king of Babylon." Those are some interesting names. I don't know that I would ever want to have one of those names for my name. Can you only imagine trying to yell at your child with a name like that? But there are some interesting things to consider with these names. This Nergal-Shazar and Rav-Mag. Nergal-Shazar is Strong's word H5371, or Prince of Fire, chief soothsayer and ruler in the army of Nebuchadnezzar. And Rav-Mag, and B's are V's in the Jewish language, so Rav-Mag is Strong's word H7248, soothsayer or magician or chief soothsayer, an official in Babylon. So we see that these chief soothsayers were there at the siege of Jerusalem. And this group of cult leaders were very elevated in the Babylonian Empire. Even when the Babylonian Empire fell, these Medo-Persian Empire took over. In Cyrus, you still have the high-ranking officials like this in government office, in a group called the Magi. Now, you think, well, why did you talk about that? Well, we're going to see exactly where this ties in. The conqueror of Jerusalem, and where these chief sorcerers, Chaldeans, these Magi, were there at the taking of Jerusalem. We turn to Daniel chapter 1. And we see in here in Daniel chapter 1, the children whom have no blemish, this is Daniel chapter 1 verse 4, but well favored and skillful in all wisdom and cunning in knowledge and understanding and science, and such had the ability to learn and to stand in the king's place, to whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. Skipping down to verse 6. Now among those were the children of Judea, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Verse 7 in Daniel chapter 1 says, "Unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, and unto Hananiah of the name Shadrach, and to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego." Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Have we ever heard of those? Do we know who those people might be? Shadrach, I think we know exactly who those are. In fact, I remember they were in the fiery furnace but there was a fourth with him, that like the Son of God. Wow. Interestingly enough, now we're seeing, now that the Chaldeans, the Magi, the wise men, were there at the siege of Jerusalem, and they, as the king told them to take the favored children, that they might teach them and nurture them in the ways of the wise, Daniel was part of that. So now we're starting to see the Jewish people introduced to the Chaldeans, to the Magi, into the Medo-Persian Empire. And if you want to see exactly how that plays out, you're going to have to tune in again tomorrow. Because unfortunately, we're running out of time for today. But what an interesting way, as we looked today, we saw that not all biblical accounts line up with what's in our head, didn't we? In fact, we now see that the wise men, these Magi, may have very well been these guys from the east, the Chaldeans. And now we're starting to see exactly how those wise men, who have a false religion, a counterfeit religion as it were, might have been influenced by the Jewish people. In fact, here we see that Daniel and his friends, Mishael and Azariah and Hananiah, all may have had an influence on this group of people called the Magi. So tune in tomorrow, and we'll pick up right where we left off, and we'll get into the story of the wise men and how I might change your perspective of who they are and why they came seeking the King of the Jews. Don't forget, Herod was very turmoil, or had a very shaking inside when these men showed up asking, where is he that is born King of the Jews? So we'll see you tomorrow.
It is a cave, because Jesus was born in a cave, because Bethlehem was a place of the Migdal-Edar, the Tower of the Flock, and how they would build the towers. They would quarry out the stones, add those on top, make a tower or a hotel or whatever room they wanted to, and that would leave the sharp edges of the cave. And since it was a Passover lamb factory, the shepherds were Levitical shepherds. Their lambs were specially groomed to go for the Passover. They had to be without a blemish. And so they would wrap them in swaddling clothes. And so this is why it was such a sign to the shepherds. You know, you're going to find a baby, and he's going to be dressed up like a lamb.
Yeah.
And so I think when people see that, you say, wow, the plan of God is incredible.